We do not stand still and are developing for you, so we bring to your attention a new voice and a new story.
My name is Megan Woods. At 65, I've come to realize that our greatest hurts often stem from those we've given the most to. I single handedly raised three children, James, Melissa, and Daniel, after their father abandoned us when they were ages 5, 3, and 1. For 30 years, I dedicated all my resources to providing them with decent lives, juggling various jobs, budgeting meticulously, and making do without many comforts so they could seize opportunities I never had. If you find this tale of sweet retribution appealing, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, liking, sharing, and activating notifications for new daily stories. This is not a plea for sympathy. I made these decisions voluntarily, out of love. However, I believe it's crucial for you to understand the backstory to fully appreciate what followed. The twist is that while my children assumed I lived a financially strained life all along, the reality was quite the opposite. 35 years ago, I put $25,000 from my grandmother's inheritance into a fledgling tech firm called NextGen Systems, suggested by my college roommate, Sarah. Her idea was for robust data security software, an innovative concept as businesses were primarily paper-based. Many doubted her vision, but I backed it. "This could revolutionize things, Megan," Sarah asserted, radiating conviction in her small apartment filled with circuit boards and coding notebooks. "Businesses will need secure digital information management. This is the future." I gave her a check, virtually all I had, and was granted an 18% stake in a company without an office yet. This faith-driven decision would reshape my life, though not how anyone could foresee. For years, NextGen Systems remained merely a name on Sarah's diligently dispatched quarterly reports. Initially, the firm expanded gradually, but saw rapid growth during the late 90s and early 2000s as businesses embarked on their digital transitions. What started as modest returns transformed into significant payouts that I discreetly allocated to a hidden account, unbeknownst to my children. By this point, I had learned a bitter lesson about money and relationships. When James was 8, my then-spouse Greg found out about the $5,000 inheritance from my aunt, which seemed like a fortune to us at that time, given our financial struggles and small apartment living. I intended to save it for the children's education fund, but Greg had different plans. He persuaded me to invest it in his friend's business endeavor, a bar promising to redefine local nightlife. In less than half a year, the money vanished. The bar never came to fruition, and Greg's alcohol addiction worsened. In that encounter, his punch struck my cheek for the first instance, yet far from the last. 3 months down the line, he abandoned us, choosing a waitress from the diner where I had been working early mornings. His final words to me were, "You never possessed anything worth holding on to anyway." Following Greg's departure, a choice shaped my life for the subsequent 3 decades. I vowed to conceal the burgeoning wealth from neighbors, friends, and especially my offspring. I wasn't deceiving them, or so I rationalized. It was about instilling values that couldn't be purchased. Thus, I persisted in my work at the diner, remained living in our humble dwelling in a working-class district, and continued clipping coupons, shopping sales, and mending clothes rather than buying new ones. Concurrently, next-generation dividends and stock value kept escalating unnoticed, steadily amassing a fortune that was unknown to all. My kids witnessed me dedicating extensive hours to work and forgoing personal comforts to prioritize their needs. I aspired they would grasp empathy and gratitude for my actions. James excelled in high school football, Melissa mastered dance, while Daniel joined numerous clubs he found intriguing. I funded these activities with my extra shifts at the diner, although they assumed it was normal expenditure. I didn't voice financial hardships explicitly, but subtly hinted about our financial challenges. We were adequately provided for, which I confirmed when they inquired about costly footwear or latest video games. We were fortunate compared to many. For years, I drove the same Toyota Corolla and turned down extravagant restaurant dinners or trips beyond my means. I continued residing in the same 3-bedroom house even after the kids moved out, citing its affordability. However, unbeknownst to them, my wealth accumulated into millions. Although I did splurge on their education with some of the money, I lived frugally in other aspects to maintain this facade. My 3 children graduated debt-free from top universities, attributing their success to scholarships, personal sacrifices I made, and small loans I took out. In truth, I financed every penny using my future earnings. "How fortunate you are," they would say. "Mom went to great lengths to ensure you didn't have debts," their friends would remark. Indeed, she worked tirelessly for our benefit. They express a blend of pride and something else in their tones, an emotion that later manifested as entitlement. By the time James was employed as a corporate lawyer, Melissa as a marketing executive, and Daniel as a software engineer, I had amassed a significant fortune of close to $12 million, primarily in stocks from future generations that had split numerous times over the years, with the remainder wisely invested by Sarah's financial advisors. Despite my continuous morning jobs at Molly's Minor, returning home to my humble dwelling, and living as if just one late paycheck could trigger calamity, I should have felt proud about my children's accomplishments. However, their growing prosperity seemed to alter the dynamics of how they treated me. Initially, the change was hardly noticeable, similar to a fluctuation in atmospheric pressure prior to a storm. You sense it deep within your bones before it becomes apparent in the skies. James visited less frequently and spent our short lunches checking his watch. Melissa would ring, but discussions usually veered towards my financial situation, a query that seemed more about alleviating her guilt than displaying genuine worry. Daniel, my youngest, still expressed love, but even he started to reframe our bond around what he could provide for the struggling mother, as if I had been transformed into a charity recipient. I convinced myself it was normal. They constructed their separate lives with their distinct families. James wed Catherine, a pediatrician from a prosperous family who continued to display her disdain for my humble dwelling and attire. Melissa bore 2 children with her spouse, Ryan, yet seldom brought them to visit the modest abode of her grandmother. Daniel stayed single, dedicating himself to his work at an emerging tech startup. However, on my 65th birthday, a change I'd sensed was approaching materialized, impossible to deny or rationalize anymore. They had organized a dinner in my honor, not at our customary venue for birthdays, but at La Maison, an extravagant French restaurant downtown. I donned my finest attire, a navy blue gown acquired years ago for a neighbor's wedding and saved for special events. I even indulged myself by getting my hair styled at the salon, an unusual luxury. Upon arrival, I found them already seated at a secluded table, speaking softly before falling silent upon noticing me arrive. Their smiles appeared scripted, their embraces casual. "Mom, you've arrived?" Melissa stated, standing to hug me. We had been discussing the menu moments ago. "Everything looks fantastic." I took my seat, feeling out of place despite my attempts at proper attire. Catherine, James's spouse, gave me a swift, judgmental once-over that seemed to reinforce her opinion of me. "You look good, Mom," James said, though his gaze barely reached mine. "We ordered you a glass of champagne. It's a celebration, you know." The night flowed smoothly on the outside. They inquired about my job at the diner, my garden, about Mrs. Peterson's health next door. I reciprocated with questions about their work, their children, their homes. The dialogue remained cautiously shallow, more like chit-chat between strangers than family. It wasn't until the dessert was served, a delicate lemon tart with a solitary candle, that the true intention of the evening became clear. "Mom," James initiated, placing his coffee cup thoughtfully. "We've been discussing, and we believe it's essential you consider some adjustments." "Adjustments?" I echoed, the candlelight dancing between us. "You're not as young as you used to be," Melissa intervened, her voice soft yet condescending. "That house is too much for you to manage on your own. And the neighborhood isn't what it once was," Catherine commented, assuming she knew my neighborhood's history. Daniel, at least, seemed uncomfortable. "In essence, Mom, we're concerned about you living alone at your age. We propose selling the house," James summarized, stating his case with a lawyer's clarity. "There's an excellent assisted living facility nearby named Sunset Gardens. We've researched it, and with the sale of your home, you should be able to afford it for some time," Melissa added, giving a glance to her brother. "And we'd all lend a hand if necessary." I fixed my gaze on them, the candlelight mirrored within my eyes. "Are you suggesting I shift into a retirement home at the age of 65? Questioned James swiftly, correcting his statement. "It's not a retirement home," he clarified. "It's an independent living community. You would have your own apartment, activities with people your own age, and no longer have to work," Daniel added, seemingly bestowing a gift. "I understand," was my quiet response. "Have you all been discussing this without me?" They glanced at each other. "We wanted to gather all the details," Melissa explained, "to make it simpler for you to decide." But it wasn't a decision they were offering. It was a plan they had already initiated. I could see it in Catherine's approving nod, in the brochure James now took from his coat pocket, in their relieved expressions. It seemed as though by resolving the issue of their aging mother, they could now concentrate entirely on their own lives, free from my cumbersome presence. "And what about my possessions? Is this your house?" I inquired, maintaining a composed tone despite the mounting anger within me. We'd assist you in sorting through everything. Melissa comforted me. Keep what's significant. What would fit in your new location? What about the rest? I probed further. A brief silence ensued. I suppose there are services available for that. Services? To dispose of the life I've constructed. Mom, you're making this seem worse than it actually is, James interjected, subtly expressing irritation in his tone. We're trying to aid you. I scrutinized their faces, once my central world, for whom I had relinquished much. In their gazes, I perceived not affection or reverence, but a faint exasperation of individuals dealing with an obligation they wished could be resolved more promptly. I contemplated my silent wealth, the millions they remained ignorant about. I contemplated the lessons I'd attempted to impart regarding value and self-worth that evidently hadn't taken root. I need some time to consider this, I eventually stated, extinguishing the candle with a firm exhale. Certainly, James replied hastily. Take as much time as you require. However, his eyes conveyed something else. They suggested he had anticipated my resistance, already outlining a strategy to overcome it. My son, the lawyer, was preparing an argument for my independence. As they guided me to my car, my 10-year-old Honda that replaced the Toyota when it ultimately broke down, I felt a soothing sense of clarity settle in. I had spent 3 decades feigning poverty to instill values in my children, only to realize they had learned an entirely different lesson. They had learned to value only what was new, shiny, and expensive. They had learned to disregard those who appeared to have less. They had learned to view my life, work, home, choices, not with admiration for the sacrifices made, but with contempt for what they perceived as failure. We'll speak tomorrow, Melissa said, planting a kiss on my cheek. Could we visit Sunset Gardens together this weekend? You nodded in agreement, struggling to find words. As you drove back to your overwhelming house, a plan started shaping up in your mind. If they were planning to dismiss me due to their misconceptions about my abilities, it might be the right moment to demonstrate what I truly offer. The day following my birthday dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, observing the sunrise transform my humble backyard into a canvas of gold and shadow. The garden I've nurtured for 20 years was adorned with early summer blossoms, peonies, irises, and the first roses of the season. It was serene, recognizable, and entirely mine. Since 7 a.m., my phone had been buzzing nonstop. 3 texts from Melissa about touring Sunset Gardens on Saturday. 2 missed calls from James, who rarely called before 9 unless it was urgent. Even Daniel had sent a tentative message. Hey Mom, hope you're not angry about last night. They think they know what's best for me, I muttered as I set down my phone on the table, taking another sip of coffee. Little did they realize the life I had cultivated in this humble abode, far removed from their refined standards. Here was a close-knit community who cared for one another. Weekly book clubs, neighborhood kids whose pets I looked after during family vacations, and unbeknownst to them, a thriving financial endeavor that blossomed within these seemingly ordinary walls. At 9:30, I dialed Sarah Livingston, my former roommate and now CEO of NextGen Systems. Despite her ascension from struggling entrepreneur to a tech titan, her voice still held a comforting familiarity. I was about to call you, I began, then paused. How are you? She replied, I'm well. In reality, what I said wasn't entirely accurate. I require your guidance as Sarah, and potentially your assistance. I shared the predicament, the actions of my children, their presumptions about my finances, their scheme to place me in assisted living. You listened without interjecting, though I could sense your occasional subtle signs of disapproval. You asked if they were aware, after I finished speaking, about your NextGen shares, about anything at all. No, I answered. I never disclosed it to them. At first, it was about shielding them from repeating my mistake with their father. Later, it became about instilling values. That worth isn't defined by money or possessions. Now, though, I question if I taught them anything at all, I confessed, or if I merely provided them a reason to regard me as insignificant. Sarah remained silent for a moment. What is your intention, Megan? The query lingered between us, straightforward yet deep. What was it that I desired? For 3 decades, my desires had been secondary to my children's requirements, my identity immersed in motherhood. My choice to conceal my wealth was in part to shape the individuals they would become. I wished them to perceive me, I admitted eventually, not as a hassle, not as a charitable case, not as an issue to be resolved. I want them to grasp that my worth as a person isn't contingent on my financial status or residence. Despite the fact that your bank balance could purchase their houses multiple times, Sarah pointed out with a sardonic smile. Yes, I acknowledged. Yet I don't merely wish to inform them about the money. That would be too straightforward. They'd transition from disregarding me to finding me intriguing, and I wouldn't know if they were seeing me or my net worth. Thus, what's your strategy? After a deep breath, I replied, I aim to devise a circumstance that compels them to challenge their beliefs about me, value, and what truly matters. And I need your assistance to execute it. After wrapping up our call, we had devised a plan that would transpire over the following months. It wasn't about retribution, I reassured myself. Instead, it was about disclosing what had been concealed for far too long. The remainder of my morning was spent dialing numbers to my bank, NextGen's legal department, and a real estate agent acquainted through my neighbor, Ellen. By midday, all the pieces were arranged. All I needed now was to put them into action. I messaged Melissa, Saturday is suitable for the tour, can't wait. Then I phoned the diner, requesting a week off for the first time in 15 years. Molly, the owner, was taken aback but quickly became worried. Everything all right, Megan? You seldom take time off. All is well, I reassured her. Personal matters requiring attention, family-related issues. The subsequent days were spent readying for the tour of Sunset Gardens on Saturday. I delved into its details extensively, scrutinizing reviews and financial records. I discovered that despite being advertised as an independent living community, residents frequently faced pressure to transition to assisted living arrangements after moving in. The small apartments my children envisioned for me were just 400 square feet and lacked the kitchen facilities necessary for my passion for cooking. As anticipated, the cost was steep, draining my modest savings account while appearing affordable with the help of family contributions. In essence, they planned to offset my living expenses, a financial obligation that would eventually foster resentment. The day turned out sunny and pleasant. James came in his BMW, fortunately with Catherine absent. Melissa and Ryan were already at Sunset Gardens when we arrived. Their children, Emma and Liam, visibly displeased about spending their Saturday at a retirement community in the back seat of their SUV. Daniel arrived last, his electric vehicle softly stopping next to James's polished sedan. He gave me an authentic hug, one that didn't seem obligatory. You look good, Mom, he said, making me ponder if he noticed I was wearing a new blouse, something I rarely splurge on. The facility tour was as anticipated. Staff displaying forced joviality, focusing on safety aspects and social events, carefully omitting discussions about how rapidly resident autonomy could be restricted. My children nodded favorably at everything the guide said, occasionally looking at me to ascertain my response. I kept a pleasant, neutral demeanor throughout, inquiring about practical matters like costs, agreements, and the consequence for a resident running out of funds. That's not something you need to fret over, James stated, preventing the guide from providing a cautious response. After the tour, we sat in the dining area of the facility, a spacious room reminiscent of a hotel restaurant despite attempts at cozy decor, discussing our observations. Melissa was enthusiastic about the one-bedroom corner unit, stating it receives plenty of light. The activities program is excellent, James added, mentioning bridge clubs, book clubs, and museum outings. As the only one interested in my thoughts, Daniel asked, What did you think, Mom? I sipped the average coffee they served. It's efficient, I replied cautiously. Everything seems designed to minimize risk and maximize supervision. Melissa and James exchanged glances. That's the idea, Mom, Melissa said softly, so we don't have to worry about you. I nodded. I understand, I said. And my house? What happens to that in this plan? They explained, as if talking to a child, that I would sell it as part of the arrangement. The funds would be allocated towards your care here. Once those resources exhaust, I inquired. In such case, my house will be lost, as this place isn't economical. You replied uneasily. We would assist, you asserted, but not convincingly. Your generosity is appreciated, I retorted, expressing the opposite sentiment. However, I've never been at ease with the notion of being reliant on my children. I've always been self-supporting. But that's the crux, Mother, Melissa interjected. You can't sustain self-support at the diner indefinitely. You're beyond retirement age. I recognize my age. Thank you, I replied, with a hint of firmness creeping into my tone. And I'm not yet ready to be deemed obsolete. No one is suggesting that, Daniel said hastily, sending his siblings cautionary glances. We merely want your well-being. Comfortable, I repeated, in an apartment of 400 square feet lacking a kitchen, garden, and privacy, inhabited by strangers instead of the familiar neighbors from decades past. Mother, James started to say, but I stopped him with a raised hand. I understand your worry, I replied, my tone indicating otherwise. However, I require additional time to ponder my choices, as this is a significant decision. Melissa's voice took on a hint of annoyance. What possibilities are we talking about? You can't keep living in that house without earning an income, and you need to retire. You might be surprised by the alternatives at my disposal. I replied calmly. For now, though, I prefer to return home. My true residence. The journey back was tense as James persisted in discussing the advantages of Sunset Gardens, while I steered conversations towards his children's accomplishments or Melissa's recent professional advancement. By the time he dropped me off, his hands were tight on the wheel from repressed agitation. We're trying to aid you, Mom, he said as I stepped out of the car. I leaned in to look at him through the open window. I comprehend your intentions, James. Is it clear if you're aware of something? Before he could reply, I walked up my driveway, sensing his gaze on my retreating figure until I shut the door. The first stage of my strategy was accomplished. By giving them a hint that I might oppose their attempts to control my life, but not completely dismissing it, I had left an impression. Now, I moved on to the second phase. The following morning, I placed a call and feigned illness to the diner, for what could have been the third time in 15 years. Next, I dialed a private investigator suggested by Sarah. I was eager to discover the truth behind my children's conversations about me and their genuine reasons for desiring my presence at Sunset Gardens. Within days, I received an answer, delivered in a plain manila envelope filled with transcripts of text messages, emails, and social media chats between my 3 kids over the recent months. The content left me heartbroken, but also strengthened my resolve. This was the exchange between James and Melissa. The current value of Mom's home exceeds $300,000 due to the enhancement of the neighborhood. This, combined with her savings, should cover Sunset Gardens for a while, at least. James, we can't sustain her financially indefinitely. What follows next? Melissa, later on we will devise a solution. Perhaps she may qualify for Medicaid if we arrange it correctly. Daniel, to all parties involved. This situation seems unfair. She's not incapable of making decisions for herself. Melissa agrees, but points out that Mom can be obstinate. If we don't intervene, she will work herself into exhaustion. They seem to recall our father, the one who abandoned us, swindled us, and physically abused me when I questioned him, as a guide in understanding her. They were young when he left. Could they have absorbed aspects of him that I was unaware of? The conversations unfolded, disclosing intentions to progressively clear items from my home that were old or superfluous. Debates over who might want my mother's antique dining table, a family heirloom they had not shown interest in earlier, and tactics to persuade me to relinquish my tenacious autonomy. The most telling exchange ensued. James, the real estate agent, estimates that with some aesthetic renovations, Mom's house could be valued at around $350,000. That's a substantial amount for her care. Melissa, for her care, you mean? James, of course, but if there are any leftovers once she's gone, it would aid in the children's college funds. Melissa, if there are any remaining funds, these institutions aren't cheap. Daniel, are we actually contemplating using Mom's money before she has consented to sell her house? This seems like we're preparing to profit from her. James, don't exaggerate. We're simply ensuring her well-being and being pragmatic about the financial aspects. That's all. I placed the documents aside, a frosty sense of clarity enveloping me. This wasn't about my personal welfare. It was about my possessions. They had appraised my house, the dwelling I had nurtured for 3 decades, where I had nurtured them, where their heights were merely marked on the kitchen door frame as a mere financial resource to be sold off. And they presumed, no, they anticipated my eventual dependence upon their assistance, never fathoming that I was financially independent multiple times over. It was time for Phase 3. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah. I'm prepared, I informed her. Let's proceed with all plans. Are you certain, Megan? She inquired. Once we do this, there's no turning back. I'm positive, I replied, maintaining my composure. It's time for my children to understand the truth about me, about themselves, and about what truly matters. The gears were now set in motion. Inside a week, my offspring will uncover the extent of their misconceptions about their supposedly financially struggling mother and bear the repercussions of their actions, rooted in that erroneous belief. I wasn't eager for their surprise, their perplexity, or the inevitable fury that would ensue. However, I was prepared for the truth to be revealed at last, regardless of the strain it might put on our bond. After all, what bond did we truly share, if it rested upon such a profound misjudgment of my identity? The invitation showed up in the mailboxes of each child on a Wednesday, a plain cream-colored envelope holding a formal card inviting them to NextGen Systems headquarters for a special meeting regarding Megan Woods on Friday afternoon. The phone call started almost instantaneously. James called first. His attorney's antennae for potential trouble sprang up immediately. Mom, what's this invitation from NextGen Systems? Are you all right? Are you experiencing some issues? Everything seems fine with me, James. It's just a presentation I believe you all should attend. But why should it concern you? And what's the connection to NextGen? That's a prominent tech company. All these questions will be addressed on Friday. Just make sure you're there at exactly 3 p.m. sharp. Melissa handled the logistics with the next, sounding somewhat worried. Mom, I have meetings scheduled all afternoon on Friday. I can't just leave everything for this unknown presentation. What's it about? It appears to be important, Melissa. My tone left no room for argument. I've already discussed it with your assistant. Your schedule has been adjusted. What? How could you do that? 3 p.m. on Friday, I repeated. Punctuality is key. Daniel, my most perceptive child, seemed to sense something significant was happening. Could this be connected to why you've been acting differently lately? He asked. Ever since your birthday, you've seemed more assertive, he noted. I've had some insights lately, I mentioned to him. Indeed, this presentation falls under that category. I require your presence, Daniel. He assured me he would be there. Regardless of what this involves, I am with you, he pledged. The following 2 days were a whirlwind of activity. I consulted Sarah and her team to finalize the presentation, conferred with my financial advisors and lawyers, and even purchased a luxurious burgundy suit for the occasion that cost more than my children had ever seen me spend on myself. On Friday morning, standing before my bedroom mirror, I scrutinized my reflection. The woman staring back at me was not the one my children recognized, the tired waitress in practical footwear and worn attire. Instead, this woman stood tall with confidence, her hair fashionably cut from a recent appointment at an exclusive salon, her eyes sharp and resolute. Now is the moment, I said to my reflection, the time for complete exposure. NextGen Systems headquarters, a striking glass and steel building, stood in downtown's core. One by one, my children entered, each looking puzzled and slightly worried. Led to a conference room on the executive level. James, fresh from court with his expensive suit, kept a watchful expression. Melissa, visibly annoyed and hurried, seemed to have juggled important arrangements to attend. Daniel, last to arrive, contrasted in his tech company casual wear among the formal business attire. None of them spoke directly to me as they settled into their seats, although all three sent me curious glances. I sat at the front of the room beside an empty chair reserved for Sarah. Exactly at 3:00 p.m., the door swung open and Sarah Livingston marched in, immediately dominating the room with her presence. As head of a top tech company, she had been showcased in business publications and news broadcasts. Yet I suspected my children might not recognize her. Good day, she began, speaking to the modest group. Thank you for joining me. I'm Sarah Livingston, CEO of NextGen Systems. A spark of recognition illuminated James's face, followed by Melissa's. Daniel, being tech-savvy, apparently knew who she was straight away. I've assembled you today, Sarah went on, to talk about something significant concerning Megan Woods. Is our mom in some sort of difficulty? James interrupted, his anxiety showing. If it involves law, I should let you know that I'm a lawyer, and your mother is not facing any issues, Mr. Woods, Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. In truth, she is in fact one of our company's initial and substantial investors. A hush settled over the room. 3 sets of eyes gazed at me simultaneously, displaying various emotions from bewilderment to disbelief. Melissa eventually spoke up. This must be a misunderstanding. Our mother is a waitress at Molly's Diner, not an investor. Sarah offered a controlled, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. No misunderstanding, Miss Woods. Your mother and I were college roommates. When I established NextGen Systems 35 years ago, she was one of the few who supported my vision. She invested $25,000 for an 18% stake in the company. With a remote click, a large screen lit up, revealing a graph depicting the growth of that investment over 3.5 decades. Currently, that 18% share is valued at approximately $24 million. The ensuing quietness was profound. I could almost hear the internal math whirring behind my children's dilated eyes. Sarah went on, seemingly unaware of the disbelief filling the room. Megan has been getting significant dividend payouts for years, which she prudently invested in a varied investment portfolio now worth about $8 million. Another click, another graph, another silence filled with amazement. In all, your mother's net worth amounts to around $32 million, placing her among our company's richest individual shareholders. Daniel was the first to speak up. Mom, is this true? I confirmed, maintaining eye contact. Yes, Daniel, it's true, but why? Melissa inquired softly. Why would you continue working at the diner? Living in that small house? Driving that old car? Why would you give off an image of poverty? The question echoed, revealing much about their perception of me over the years. I wasn't living a life of poverty, I explained evenly. I was living according to my principles. The statement encapsulated how they had viewed me all these years. I opted for work, as it offered purpose, and preferred a modest lifestyle since I lacked the need for extravagance. I kept my wealth hidden because I aimed to show you that a person's value isn't defined by their financial assets. James remained silent, his thoughts presumably adjusting to new insights about his mother's situation, perhaps considering how this disclosure influenced their previous plans. Addressing Sarah instead of me, he inquired, Miss Livingston, may I ask why you're revealing this information now after so many years? Sarah looked at me before deferring the question. Because, I stated, moving from my seat to stand beside her, it became apparent that despite my efforts, I couldn't effectively convey the lesson that held the utmost importance. You didn't view me as an individual with autonomy and respect, but as a financial burden to be handled and ultimately dissolved. Your choice of words was intentional, mirroring James's text about selling my house. His face turned red, showing he recognized the allusion. That's unfair, Mom, Melissa protested. We were trying to aid you. Sunset Gardens seems nice, and we thought. You thought I couldn't maintain my home? I interjected. You regarded my possessions as items to be dispensed or discarded, and me as a problem to be resolved as swiftly as possible. We were concerned about you, Daniel said, though his tone lacked conviction. Living alone at your age, were you? I asked. Or were you ashamed of me? Of your waitress mother and her outdated house in her unpopular neighborhood? Of the woman who never quite fit into the luxurious lives you've constructed for yourselves? None of them responded. The authenticity of my words filled the space between us, undeniable. Sarah gave a throat-clearing gesture before saying, Perhaps you'd prefer some solitude for this discussion. She then gestured towards the door and moved in that direction. Feel free to use my office, Megan, as long as it serves your needs. After she departed, we remained quiet, a silence that seemed endless. For weeks I had envisioned this moment, rehearsing what I'd say, how I would handle their anticipated queries and defenses. But when the time came, I found myself in a delay, eager to observe who among us would shatter the quiet first. It was James, predictably so, ever the one to govern uneasy circumstances. Why this moment, Mom? He questioned with a controlled tone. Why expose all of this now? Because you compel my actions, I responded briefly. Moving me into Sunset Gardens with the intention of selling my house, under the pretense of helping me, made it clear that you consider me incapable and unimportant. Melissa objected weakly, yet her voice trembled. We were merely worried, I responded softly. I've read the text between you and your siblings, discussing the sale of my house, the duration of my stay at Sunset Gardens, and the potential depletion of funds for your children's education after my demise. Their expression shifted from surprise to shame. You? You snooped into our private conversations? James questioned, trying to mask his embarrassment with anger. I engaged a professional detective to find out why my kids were suddenly curious about my living arrangements. I clarified the misunderstanding afterwards. What I uncovered was that you weren't considering my well-being, but rather my inheritance, without any prior discussion from my side. Daniel looked very pale. Mom, I assure you I wasn't at ease with any of it. I informed him it felt inappropriate. Yet you didn't voice your concerns, I emphasized. You didn't warn me about your siblings measuring the drapes before I had even left. There was a lengthy silence after that. The revelation of your financial matters and knowledge of their plans seemed to have rendered everyone speechless. So, what's next? James, always practical, broke the silence. Clearly, you won't be moving to Sunset Gardens. You don't require our aid. What do you desire from us? The question took me aback. What did I desire? Apologies, definitely. Acknowledgement of their misjudgments and disrespect. But beyond that, I want what I've always wanted, I replied. A relationship with my children grounded in mutual respect and sincere concern. Not duty, not monetary gains, not the facade of dutiful offspring attending their aged mother. This is what I saw reflected in your faces. Yet, I questioned whether it remained a reality after this incident. Melissa's eyes brimmed with tears. Are you telling us you no longer wish to be part of our lives? I read from their expressions, but it was more complex than that. Not following my guidance, not regarding me as an equal partner in decision-making, not valuing me for who I am, but rather what I might leave behind. This is the relationship I seek to dismantle. That's unjustified, Mother, Daniel objected. We love you. Do you? I asked straightforwardly. Or do you love the concept of me, the self sacrificing mother who labored tirelessly for your benefit? For when this archetype started to show signs of aging, of desiring personal freedom and autonomy, you were quick to disregard my needs in favor of your own convenience. James, always the lawyer, was already computing his next move. I could almost sense the mental revisions taking place behind his eyes. Changes to long held beliefs. Rethinking power relationships after realizing that my mother was not a financial burden, but financially independent in her own right. We erred, he admitted eventually. We should have discussed our worries openly with you instead of making decisions without your input. That was wrong, and I am sorry. The apology was well phrased, yet I knew my eldest son well enough. This was damage control, not a heartfelt remorse. I acknowledge that, James, I replied, denying him the immediate forgiveness he anticipated. But an apology doesn't resolve the core issue. You failed to recognize me as a whole individual deserving of autonomy and respect. You saw me as a problem to be controlled. Melissa wiped away her tears. So that's it. You disclose you've been secretly wealthy all this time, and now you're done with us? What a valuable lesson, Mom. Her bitterness hurt, yet it was not surprising. Melissa has always dodged blame when confronted with her own mistakes. I haven't finished with you yet, I stated calmly. I'm requesting a reboot, a fresh relationship grounded in honesty and reciprocal respect. However, this transformation can only occur if you're prepared to perceive me as who I truly am, rather than who you presupposed me to be. But who are you then? James inquired, a hint of defiance in his tone. Because the woman we knew for 3 decades seems to have vanished. I'm still the same individual, I retorted. A woman who values diligence, straightforwardness, and authentic relationships more than status and material possessions. The only variance is that now you're aware I had options in how I lived. Choices driven by principles rather than compulsion. Daniel, who had been silent for some time, eventually spoke up. I believe I comprehend, he said thoughtfully. You weren't feigning poverty to deceive us. You were attempting to demonstrate that wealth is not significant. Yes, I responded gratefully. Precisely. I wanted you to learn to appreciate people for who they are, rather than what they possess or what they can provide you. However, we didn't grasp the lesson, he remarked, a hint of sadness in his tone. Instead, we learned to disregard those without wealth or influence, regarding them as inferior. I nodded empathetically, feeling a pang in my heart at the truth of his words. That wasn't my intention, but it appears that's what transpired. So, what next? Melissa asked again, her voice softer now. How do we rectify this? That's for each of you to decide, I responded. I can't guide you on rebuilding our relationship or earning back my trust. That's something you must figure out among yourselves. James had been scrutinizing me closely, his attorney's eyes evaluating the new circumstances. Regarding your will? He inquired directly. Did you alter it too? Melissa showed surprise at his directness. But I wasn't taken aback. James had always been pragmatic in his thinking. In truth, yes, I have, I confirmed. As of yesterday, my estate is now administered by a trust that will handle my assets after I pass away. The trust has certain stipulations regarding distribution and recipients. Can you elaborate on these conditions? He inquired. I'm not prepared to discuss that right now, I responded firmly. My estate planning is my private matter, not yours. Your initial question seems more focused on what you might inherit than on mending our relationship, which suggests you may still be missing the purpose of all this. James blushed but remained silent, understanding he was in a weak, argumentative position. Perhaps we could all use some time to digest this, Daniel proposed, always the mediator. There's a lot here to absorb. I nodded, feeling drained suddenly. The adrenaline that had sustained me during the revelation was dwindling, leaving behind an empty ache. I had anticipated this conversation to be challenging, but the emotional impact was greater than expected. Yes, taking some time seems prudent, I concurred. Take all the time you need. I won't be leaving for Sunset Gardens, was a joke that fell flat. My children gathered their belongings in awkward silence, each engrossed in their private thoughts. As they prepared to depart, I felt an urgent desire to reach out one last time. I do love all of you, I whispered softly. My affection has never been in question, but love without respect isn't enough anymore. Daniel approached and gave me a genuine hug, not the customary kind I had grown used to. I love you too, Mom, he murmured. I'm sorry we ruined everything. Melissa hesitated before reciprocating his gesture, though her hug was tense and brief. We need to talk more, she said. When things quieted down, James simply nodded, his face unreadable. I'll call you next week, he said, avoiding eye contact. After they left, I remained alone in Sarah's luxurious office, surrounded by the symbols of wealth that I deliberately chose not to showcase in my own life. The irony was not lost on me. A few minutes later, Sarah arrived with a worried expression. How did it go? It went as well as possible under the circumstances. I sighed. They're stunned, bewildered, hurt, ashamed, and reevaluating everything they believed about their mother and their future. She sat down next to me, taking my hand. Do you regret telling them? After some thought, I responded, no. It had to be done. I couldn't keep living a half-truth for their comfort, especially when they no longer saw me as deserving of basic respect. What are your plans now? This was the same question James asked, but hearing it from Sarah felt different, like genuine curiosity instead of an attempt to gauge how my choices might affect him. I plan to live, I replied simply, according to my own desires, continue working at the diner if I wish, or explore the world, or finally write that cookbook I've been contemplating for years. Whatever path I take, it's my decision, not one dictated by those who assume they understand me better. Sarah smiled. And your connection with them? Can it be restored? I confessed, I hope so, but it's not entirely within my control. They must learn to accept me for who I am, not the mother they imagined or the wealthy woman they've discovered, but as a whole individual with autonomy and dignity. Sarah added sympathetically, squeezing my hand. You made the right call. It took courage to address them in this manner. I countered, it wasn't necessarily bravery, more of a necessity. I couldn't let them view me as an obligation to be handled instead of a person deserving respect. Driving home that night in my humble Honda, a choice that now felt rebellious rather than essential, I pondered the future. Would my children reach out with sincere efforts to rebuild our bond? Might they hide behind pain and deceit? Would they just watch, hoping I'd yield and act as if this never transpired? I wasn't sure, and for the first time in many years, that ambiguity didn't unnerve me. Whatever was next would be genuine, whether it brought good or ill. There would be no more pretending, no more hidden desires, no more being judged based on misconceptions. As I parked in my driveway, the house they had intended to sell without me, a tranquility washed over me. This house was mine, along with my life and my future. No one could take it from me again. Not even my own children. I was living my reality, whatever repercussions might ensue. The days after the NextGen Systems disclosure passed in an unusual stillness. None of my children contacted or visited during that first weekend, though I hadn't truly anticipated them to. They required time for reflection and adjustment, perhaps redefining their perspective on their mother and themselves. During this period, I took the chance to implement delayed adjustment. I contacted Molly at the diner, formally resigning my position, though I offered to step in when needed. She was taken aback but sympathetic, particularly after I clarified my intention of pursuing other passions. You've worked tirelessly, Megan, she said affectionately. You deserve some personal time. I decluttered my wardrobe, discarding garments past their usefulness, and indulging in a small shopping spree for items that truly sparked joy rather than simply serving practical purposes. I arranged for a landscaper to assist with the challenging garden tasks I'd been grappling with. I even engaged a cleaning service to visit bi-monthly, not because I couldn't maintain cleanliness myself, but because I opted to allocate my time towards more fulfilling activities. These weren't extravagant transformations. I didn't yearn to abruptly live like a wealthy individual purchasing estates and luxury vehicles. That wasn't my character. Yet I did indulge in small luxuries I had previously foregone due to my self-imposed frugality. On a Tuesday morning, as I was savoring a relaxed cup of coffee on my back porch, the phone rang with Daniel's name appearing on the screen. Hi, Mom, he said upon answering, his voice cautious. Is this a convenient time to chat? Absolutely, I replied, relaxing in my chair. How are you doing? Frankly, still grappling with everything. It's overwhelming. I get that, I said softly. Take all the time you need. That's the issue, he said, a tinge of annoyance in his tone. I don't know how much time is adequate. I can't stop thinking about everything. Our upbringing, your lifestyle, the sacrifices you made for us. Feeling awful about how we treated you. Especially lately, Daniel, he said. You were right about everything, Mom. We failed to see you as an individual with autonomy and dignity, treating you instead like a problem to be solved. James and Melissa seemed to take that approach, and I went along with it, even though it felt wrong. I let you down. His voice was filled with pain, causing my heart to ache. Among my children, Daniel had always been the most empathetic, sensitive to others' feelings. I didn't let you down, I reassured him gently. You may think so, but not as much as you believe. Your texts indicated your discomfort with their plans. You expressed your objections. But I didn't stop them, he replied. I didn't come to you directly. I didn't value our relationship enough to tell you the whole truth. Why not? I inquired, genuinely curious. What prevented you from doing so? He fell silent for a moment before answering. I sensed he was hesitant about contradicting James and Melissa, as they have always been self-assured, certain of their decisions. Given my younger status and history of following their lead, you are no longer a child, Daniel. I reminded him softly. At 32 years old and a successful professional, you don't have to submit to them anymore. He acknowledged this. I understand, he sighed. That's something I need to improve, standing up for what I believe is right, even if the people I care about disagree. That's valuable advice, I said, impressed by his self-awareness. After a brief pause, he asked, Mom, can I come over for dinner tonight? Just to talk. To begin understanding our relationship now. No pressure, if you're not ready. His request deeply moved me. Of my children, Daniel appears most keen on rebuilding our relationship sincerely, based on truth and mutual respect, rather than just damage control. I would enjoy that greatly, I told him. How about 7 o'clock? When Daniel arrived in the evening, he carried a bouquet of carefully chosen flowers, not the common kind picked up at a supermarket checkout, but a thoughtfully arranged selection that seemed to be from a professional florist. These are lovely, I said, accepting them with genuine delight. Thank you. I remember how much you enjoy gardening, he said, trailing behind me into the kitchen where I started arranging them in a vase. I thought you'd appreciate them. We moved to the back porch with glasses of iced tea as the early evening sun cast long shadows over my garden. For a while, we simply sat in comfortable silence, relishing the tranquility. You know, Daniel eventually said, I always loved this house. It always felt like a real home, not just a place to live. That was the plan, I replied. I wanted you children to have stability, security, a place where you felt safe and cherished. We did, he affirmed me. At least I did. This house was more than a home for me. Never did I feel we lacked essentials during my upbringing, which is puzzling to comprehend now. You provided us with everything necessary, although you could have given us much more. It's the material possessions, not children's needs, that I insisted upon focusing on. I aim to instill character over materialism, endeavor over entitlement in you. I believed minimal living would facilitate these lessons. Daniel pondered this. Could it be that if we had lived more opulently, our outcomes might have been different? Better or worse? This question I've often asked myself throughout the years. I'm unsure, I confessed. I've pondered if perhaps I overcorrected in my efforts to teach you values through simplicity. If my method to instill values through modesty unintentionally fostered a false dichotomy between wealth and materialism on one hand, and frugality and virtue on the other. Life isn't as clear-cut as that. Daniel agreed thoughtfully. The realization hit me hard. It seemed that by showcasing my relentless work and modest lifestyle as a means of escape from poverty, I unintentionally instilled in my children the fear of simplicity instead of valuing it. This could account for much of how they've lived their lives and how they came to perceive me. James and Melissa took this further, equating worth with wealth and status. Though I tried to resist, I still allowed their perspective on my value as something to control, manipulate. Now that I understand the truth, Daniel said, he is making an effort to distinguish between what he truly values and what has been ingrained in him. I've come to understand that I desire a relationship with you grounded in our true selves, not on preconceptions or duties. That evening, we conversed extensively, more honestly than we had in years. Daniel inquired about Sarah and NextGen, my reasons for investing, my approach to reconciling my hidden wealth with my minimalist lifestyle. I probed about his profession, his ambitions, his personal life. These weren't the surface-level questions I was used to asking, but rather deeper questions that indicated I recognized him as the intricate person he is. When he was ready to depart, he paused at the door. Have you heard from James or Melissa? I responded, not yet. I suppose I will eventually, I added, unsure of the form it would take. They're still processing, Daniel affirmed. James is, well, James, analyzing everything, trying to discern the angle, and Melissa is hurt, feeling you deceived her all these years. I acknowledged it, I replied, though the sentiment pricked me. They'll contact us when they're prepared, or they won't. That's their decision. Daniel embraced me fervently before departing. I appreciate your honesty, Mom. Though it muddles things, it's preferable to persisting in a fundamental misunderstanding between us. I observed him pull away, a whirlpool of anticipation and sorrow inside me. One connection was slowly being restored. The others remained ambiguous. Melissa contacted me 2 days later, her voice tense with repressed emotion. "I must speak with you," she declared bluntly, "to discuss everything. We agreed to meet at a serene cafe the day after tomorrow, a neutral ground where neither of us holds an advantage." Upon my arrival, Melissa was already there, her spine stiff, her hands nervously tearing at a paper napkin. "Thank you for coming," I said, taking my seat opposite her. Looking above, her eyes seemed tired, suggesting sleepless nights. "I nearly didn't come," she said, relief in her tone. The waitress arrived, bringing tea for me and coffee for Melissa. As she departed, the air between us thickened with unvoiced concerns. "Why?" Melissa eventually asked, her voice quivering slightly. "Why did you make us think you were struggling for all these years? Don't you know how concerned I've been about you? How much effort I put into finding ways to assist you during your retirement?" The reproach in her speech was evident. In her mind, I had betrayed her by hiding my financial stability. "I never stated I was struggling," I reminded gently. "You inferred that from my decisions to work at the diner, live in a simple house, drive an old car. Those were choices guided by values, not necessity." "But you didn't correct our assumptions," she retorted, attracting looks from nearby tables. She whispered more forcefully, visibly straining. "You gave the impression that you needed our assistance, but did I?" I questioned. "When have I ever requested financial aid or indicated struggles with money, suggesting self-sufficiency?" Melissa hesitated to speak, then chose not to. It seemed I had never presented myself as needing their help, but her perception was otherwise, she argued. "The issue is, Melissa," I interjected, "you formed your opinion of me based on assumptions instead of observing my reality. You presumed I was a burden in need of management rather than asking what I truly wanted or needed." She defended herself, claiming they were trying to assist. "Were you helping me, Melissa?" I inquired softly. "Or were you attempting to resolve what you perceived as an issue? An aging parent who did not fit comfortably into your affluent lifestyle?" Tears filled her eyes. "How can you think that given my frequent calls, including you in family gatherings, and showing concern about your future? Behaviors indicative of a caring daughter, you say? Yet, duty is not the same as respect or sincere affection. When you arranged to place me in Sunset Gardens without fully consulting me, when discussions were held about selling my house and dividing my belongings while I was allegedly hospitalized, you weren't treating me with respect as an independent individual." "I believed I was doing the right thing," she whispered, a tear trickling down her face. "I understand your sentiment," I said, softening my voice. "However, your notion of what is right stemmed from assumptions about who I am and what I require, assumptions that were fundamentally flawed." The waitress brought our drinks, providing a brief respite from the intensity of our discussion. Melissa sipped her coffee, seemingly gathering her thoughts. "So, where do we stand now?" she asked at last. "You've expressed your stance clearly, and it's apparent that you aren't in need of our assistance. We acknowledge now that we may have been unreasonable to assume otherwise." "So, what follows next?" I clarified, a touch of irritation sparking from her portrayal. "This isn't about chastising or making you feel remorseful. Rather, it's about honesty and mutual regard in the future." "What does that really mean, Mom?" she asked, seeking clarity. "In essence," I explained, "it means recognizing me for who I truly am, not as a stereotype of an elderly person, not as a financial burden, not as someone whose value is measured by possessions. It means treating me with the same respect you would give a colleague or friend, valuing their opinions and decisions, even when they differ from yours." Melissa pondered my words for a lengthy silence, then questioned, "I'm still unclear on why you hid your wealth for such a prolonged period. At first, it was about providing protection and financial security that your father couldn't tamper with if he ever returned. Over time, it shifted towards instilling values, ensuring you kids didn't equate worth with possessions or status. You believe we failed that test, transforming into the very materialistic individuals we were attempting to avoid. I think you learned lessons different from what I intended, and part of that is my fault. Maybe keeping the secret for so long was a mistake." This realization seemed to catch her off guard. "Are you saying you made a mistake?" she asked. "Yes," I admitted. "I'm human, Melissa. I've made numerous mistakes in life, including in raising our children. My intentions were noble, but my strategies might have been faulty." At this admission, she softened a bit. And for the first time in our discussion, We found common ground as two fallible individuals seeking to comprehend each other. She acknowledged being both angry and hurt, but attempting to comprehend the situation. I responded, "That's the most I can hope for." Regarding the pain this disclosure has caused you, I expressed regret, clarifying that it wasn't intended. We continued our conversation for another hour, making strides in reestablishing a foundation of truth between us without resolving all issues. As we were about to depart, Melissa hesitated and shared, "James is taking this the toughest. He doesn't feel betrayed per se, more like outsmarted. He dislikes being taken by surprise." I acknowledged her words. James has always craved control and thoroughness. She suggested that he would reach out when ready, or perhaps not at all. "He will," Melissa asserted. "He just needs time to adjust his perspective on everything." Before we parted, I hugged her. Though her return was somewhat stiff, it felt like progress nonetheless. True to Melissa's forecast, James phoned the upcoming weekend, maintaining an even tone as he sought permission for a visit to discuss recent updates. As usual, he framed personal matters in professional terms. Upon his arrival, dressed casually instead of his typical attire for serious affairs, he might have been aiming to handle this discussion differently than legal negotiations. "Thank you for the meeting," he said formally upon entering. I showed him into the living room and replied, "You're my son, James. You don't need to thank me for seeing you." A brief hint of emotion flashed across his face before being concealed. "I see," he acknowledged. "Of course." I remained silent, allowing him to initiate the dialogue on his preferred terms. James often needed to feel in control of situations, a characteristic that benefited him in his legal career, but posed difficulties in personal relationships. After pondering the events at NextGen, I find myself reflecting on all the conversations we've had, and those left unsaid over time, he eventually expressed, needing my encouragement to proceed. "I wish to comprehend why," he stated, showing a slight break in his professional demeanor, revealing genuine perplexity. "Why uphold this facade for so long? What was its purpose?" The question mirrored Melissa's, but hearing it from James felt distinct, less accusatory, and more analytical. He sought to grasp the reasoning behind my actions. "It wasn't a facade, James," I clarified. "I never pretended to be anything other than what I was. I merely chose to adhere to values that didn't prioritize wealth or status. The belief that I was financially struggling came from you kids, not from any explicit claim on my part." "Yet you never contradicted that belief," he remarked. "No, I did not," I admitted. "Initially, to shield you from replicating my mistake with your father, who treated his inheritance as something to seize and waste. Later, I harbored the hope that you would learn to appreciate value beyond money, emphasizing character, compassion, authority." James comprehended this, his legal mind meticulously analyzing the data. "Thus, this was essentially a moral lesson for us?" "Not in the way you're suggesting," I clarified. "It wasn't a test designed to trip you up. It was a wish that by experiencing humble beginnings, you would develop empathy for people regardless of their wealth and grasp that one's worth isn't defined by bank balances or addresses." "You believe we missed that lesson," he echoed, mirroring Melissa's words from our cafe talk. "I believe," I said cautiously, "that recent occurrences have demonstrated to me that in your eyes, financial status has overshadowed dignity and self-determination when it comes to me. When you assumed my financial resources were limited, you felt justified in making decisions for me instead of with me." James fell silent for a while, his face showing no emotion. Suddenly, he chuckled softly, a sound I hadn't heard from him in years. "You outsmarted us," he admitted, tinges of reluctant admiration in his tone. "Thoroughly and completely. All those years we thought we knew who you were, what you required, and yet you were always one step ahead." "This isn't a game, James," I said softly. "There are no winners or losers here, just a family trying to navigate towards a more truthful connection." "Perhaps not for you," he conceded, "but you must acknowledge that the revelation was effectively dramatic. You could have simply shared your financial details when we first discussed Sunset Gardens. Instead, you orchestrated the entire situation at NextGen, even including the CEO and visual aids." I couldn't help but smile. I wanted to ensure the message was unequivocally clear. It turned out that I wasn't merely a bit more affluent than you imagined, but rather, I had been self-sufficient financially all along. Sometimes it takes a significant revelation to challenge deeply rooted beliefs. "Mission accomplished," he said dryly. "You certainly challenged our assumptions, and then some." There was a pause, but the silence felt less tense, more thoughtful. "I'm sorry," James eventually admitted, his words sounding hard for him to say, "for how he handled the Sunset Gardens situation, for failing to show you the proper respect, for assuming that we knew what was best for you. His apology caught me off guard. Not because I didn't think James capable of regret, but because he seldom expressed it so openly. Thank you, I replied simply. That means a lot to me. He still didn't completely grasp my decisions, he confessed. Why work at a diner for 15 years when you could have done anything else? Traveled the world, lived in luxury, pursued any interest or passion? His question left me pondering. Who says I wasn't following my passions? I retorted. I derived pleasure from my job at the diner. I found purpose in it, especially in interacting with regular patrons and the contentment that came with doing a good job. Not everyone finds fulfillment through wealth or status. James appeared doubtful but didn't dispute me. So, what next? With your money? With your life? I responded, clarifying my position. But you're asking as my son rather than as someone else. He seemed to realize his mistake, looking a bit sheepish. I'm asking as your son, seeking to comprehend you better than before. I've quit the diner, although I may still help out occasionally because I enjoy it. I'm contemplating writing a cookbook using the recipes I've developed throughout the years. I might venture to places I've always wanted to visit, not lavishly, but to locations of interest, I shared with him. Primarily, I plan to carry on life as usual, but now with the liberty to decide according to what brings me happiness rather than upholding an illusion. James appeared understanding towards this. As for us, your bond with the kids, I stated sincerely. It depends mostly on you. Are you open to seeing me for who I truly am, with all my complexity and autonomy? I inquired. If so, we might have a chance at forming an authentic connection, replacing what was built upon misunderstandings. I wish to give it a try, he replied, and I sensed his sincerity. It won't be simple, as old habits persist. But I yearn for a genuine relationship with you, Mom. One based on your true self, not my preconceived notion of you. I feel the same way, I responded, reaching out to grip his hand. Very much so. Before leaving, James turned back and posed one last question. Regarding the will you mentioned at NextGen, has it actually been altered? Has our inheritance been redistributed? This query could have potentially set us back, transforming our relationship once more into a monetary discussion. However, I chose to interpret it as James seeking clarity about the new circumstances. Yes, it has, I responded. My assets will now be placed in a trust with specific stipulations regarding distributions. But James, if you're attempting to restore this relationship with me by seeking your inheritance, we seem not to have learned anything from this. He replied that he wasn't here for that reason, though his tone hinted at a touch of disappointment. I merely wanted to know where things stand, he explained. Fair enough, I agreed. And now you do. After his departure, I remained in my living room, pondering over the difficult and uncomfortable conversations I'd shared with each of my children. None had been entirely straightforward or conclusive in resolving the intricate emotions and misconceptions accumulated over years. Each step marked a commencement, a first stride towards something more genuine than what preceded it. Whether these beginnings would result in the relationships I aspired for is yet to be determined. Yet, for the first time in many years, I felt genuinely perceived by my children, not as the struggling diner waitress they had previously known, nor as the newly discovered wealthy investor, but as Megan Woods, a multifaceted woman with her own beliefs, decisions, and self-worth. And that, I understood, was what I had desired all along. 6 months transpired in a pattern of gradual healing and adaptation. My relationship with each child transformed differently, at varying rates, each carving out its distinct course forward from the disclosures that had rocked our family's foundation. Daniel and I drew nearer than we had been in years, his visits not stemming from duty, but a genuine yearning for interaction. We prepared meals together, tended to the garden, and engaged in lengthy discussions spanning his profession, philosophy, and nostalgic tales from his childhood, now viewed with maturity's perspective. Among my 3 offspring, he appeared to have internalized the lesson I intended through my actions. That value is derived from character and empathy, rather than riches or position. Melissa's path was complex. She fluctuated between sincere attempts to understand me anew and slips into old tendencies of subtle derision. Yet she arranged for her children to visit more frequently and made a conscious effort to appreciate the humble charms of my residence, instead of contrasting it unfavorably with her own opulent surroundings. Though minor, these actions held significance. James proved the hardest relationship to rekindle. Ever analytical, he handled our revised circumstances with cautious diplomacy, as if dealing with uncharted legal grounds. Our exchanges were polite yet formal, lacking the casual warmth I anticipated might blossom over time. Yet, he endeavored, phoning more frequently, inquiring about my hobbies beyond mere well being, occasionally sharing hints of the youth he was, before wealth and prestige redefined his self worth. Conversely, I cherished my newfound liberty with subtle elation. I persisted in residing at my humble abode, favoring its cozy familiarity over any grander residence, yet indulged in minor luxuries once shunned. A kitchen remodel for my growing passion towards cooking, a weekly massage to alleviate the arthritis in my hands, casual trips to catch up with friends across different states. I embarked on writing my cookbook, incorporating decades of recipes perfected at the diner and at home. The project unexpectedly brought joy to me, as it stirred recollections of shared meals with my children while they were young, with friends over time, and with customers who felt like family during my tenure at Molly's. My friendship with Sarah flourished as the secret we had kept for long evolved into openness. She even persuaded me to join NextGen's board of directors, emphasizing that my insights as a seasoned investor and someone with practical knowledge would be beneficial to a firm growing more concerned about how technology could cater to various communities. I agreed, finding an unexpected sense of satisfaction in influencing decisions shaping the company's future. On a cold October night, just shy of 6 months after the disclosure at NextGen headquarters, I hosted a family dinner. The first time all three of my children gathered together in my home since before the birthday mishap. With hesitation, I extended the invitation, unsure if they were ready for such a gathering. Yet all three accepted with enthusiasm. I crafted a straightforward yet sophisticated meal: roast chicken seasoned from my garden's herbs, fresh bread, assorted vegetables in season, and a lemony dessert tart. No grandeur, merely care and precision put into it. The table was adorned with my grandmother's cherished china, seldom used, and embellished with garden-fresh flowers as the centerpiece. Daniel arrived first, carrying a fine bottle of wine and a hearty hug. "Mom, the place looks wonderful." He acknowledged the subtle modifications to the living room: new curtains, refurbished furniture, freshly painted walls, and soft cream that illuminated the room. "Thank you," I replied. Lately, I've found joy in creating an environment more deliberate and thoughtful rather than just functional. Melissa and her family followed next. Emma and Liam, Melissa's children, appeared less tense than before in my residence, seemingly no longer treating it like a museum where one shouldn't touch anything. Melissa, adopting an understated yet stylish appearance, seemed to grasp that neither extravagance nor affectation were required within my home. "This place smells delightful," she commented, handing me a box from the bakery. "I brought a dessert, but I suspect yours will surpass it." "We'll have both," I replied. "Additional dessert is always welcome." James and Catherine were the last to show up. Catherine, who had typically regarded my home with subtle disapproval, now examined it with renewed curiosity, possibly reevaluating her perspective in light of what she had discovered about her mother-in-law's affluence. "Your house looks beautiful, Megan," Catherine finally acknowledged, offering the first positive comment she had ever made about my residence. "Indeed, you seem at ease." Instead of inferring any underlying sarcasm, I chose to interpret your statement sincerely. "Thank you, Catherine. To me, comfort has always held greater significance than pomp." As we convened around the table, a brief wave of trepidation washed over me. The last communal meal here had been my unfortunate birthday dinner, where they announced their sunset garden plan. How much have we moved forward since then? Daniel lifted his glass, proposing a toast to fresh starts and authentic relationships. We all followed suit, including the kids with their sparkling cider. To new beginnings, we responded. The meal unfolded more smoothly than I had dared imagine. Dialogue flowed organically, discussing work, school, community happenings, and family tales. Some recurring, others disclosed for the first time from previously unshared perspectives. On several occasions, brief silences ensued, and there were instances where we almost resumed old habits. But Daniel typically guided us towards more genuine topics. During a pause in our discussion, Daniel mentioned Mom's appointment to the board at NextGen. James looked taken aback. "I wasn't aware," he replied. "Yes, she didn't mention it." "Impressive," James commented. "Not particularly remarkable," I responded. "I've been a significant investor for quite some time." Sarah finally managed to convince me that my insights could be beneficial in the boardroom as well. "Don't underestimate it," Melissa added, catching me off guard with her encouraging tone. "It is impressive. Few individuals are invited to join the board of a significant tech company." "You may be right," I conceded, although I suspect my 18% equity stake had something to do with the invitation. Regardless, James said, it's a notable accomplishment. The corporate realm doesn't always uphold meritocracy, not even for prominent stakeholders. Our talk veered towards your cookbook project. And surprisingly, Catherine displayed genuine curiosity. She admired those who could cook instinctively, she added, stating that she herself had to strictly adhere to recipes. Yet outcomes were still unstable. I explained that cooking is simply a matter of practice and focus, much like any other skill. If you're interested, I'd be glad to teach you the basics sometime, she hinted at considering my offer. After dinner, as the children assisted in clearing the table, a seemingly minor action yet meaningful given their past behavior towards your home, James approached me with an envelope. I wanted to hand this over to you, he said, appearing unusually reserved. Look, you'll understand soon enough. Inside was an official letter from his law firm on letterhead, announcing the creation of the Megan Woods Scholarship Fund for Single Parents. He had personally donated $50,000, along with Catherine, to help single parents pursuing education or vocational training while raising children financially. James, I expressed, genuinely touched. I'm at a loss for words. There's no need for words, he responded. It's not about acknowledgement. It's about recognizing your efforts, raising us alone, making sacrifices to give us opportunities. He continued. The fact that you had resources unused doesn't lessen the sacrifice. Instead, it makes it even more meaningful. It was then that James said something profoundly insightful about my choices, demonstrating a level of comprehension I hadn't thought possible for him. Thank you, I replied simply, holding his hand tighter. As night fell, Melissa drew me aside into the kitchen. Her face looked anxious. Mom, she said, gripping a dish towel tightly, there's something I need to discuss with you. Pause. Ryan and I are parting ways. I sighed softly. I'm truly sorry, dear. It seems it was inevitable, she admitted grudgingly. We've been maintaining the facade of a couple for the sake of our children and appearances, but there's no affection or connection left between us. Only obligations and routines. What are your plans? I questioned, worry creeping in for her sake as well as Emma and Liam's. That's what I wanted to discuss, she continued, still restless with the towel. I need to find a new place for me and the kids, someplace secure while we chart our future path. Could I possibly borrow some money for a security deposit on an apartment? The question hung heavy between us, brimming with the possibility of misinterpretation. Was this Melissa resorting to her old ways, viewing me merely as a financial resource? Perhaps it was a heartfelt moment, a daughter seeking solace from her mother amidst troubles. Indeed, I can assist, I replied cautiously. However, Melissa, let me make this clear. I'm not solely a source of funds. If you need financial aid, I'm more than willing to offer it, but what truly matters to me is supporting you emotionally during this change. That aspect means more to me than writing a check. Her eyes brimmed with tears. I understand that now, she replied. Yes, I do. And I could benefit from both forms of support. The funds are necessary, but I'm terrified, Mom. I don't know how to manage this. Live independently. Raise the children without the setup we've been accustomed to. You're stronger than you believe, I reassured her, enfolding her in a hug. And remember, you're not alone, she sobbed then, maybe for the first time revealing her true vulnerability instead of the long-held facade she had presented. In her arms, I sensed a change, a newfound authenticity, a shedding of pretenses on both our parts. Once everyone left, I sat in my garden under the stars, pondering the evening. It wasn't flawless. There were moments of tension, brief resurfacing of old habits, and sometimes less thoughtful choice of words. But it was real, possibly the most genuine encounter with all my children combined in years. The truth came at a price, undeniably, the cherished illusions we had all upheld. After my children's faith in their resilient yet struggling mother crumbled, leaving us to construct something novel from the remnants, what we were crafting felt more genuine and robust compared to its previous form. Albeit not without imperfections or hardships, it was underpinned by reality rather than misconceptions. A week later, an unanticipated guest arrived. Sarah's stylish electric vehicle parked in my driveway at the very moment I was wrapping up my morning gardening tasks. Though her visit was unscheduled, it wasn't undesired. She told me she had a meeting nearby and decided to check on me amidst the transformations. In my kitchen over coffee, just like the table where we studied together in college, now refinished yet still displaying the small scratch from the heavy textbook Sarah accidentally dropped, I shared updates about our family dinner and subsequent events. Reflecting, she pondered that James was establishing a scholarship in your honor. A touching gesture, indeed. Unforeseen and intriguing, I concurred. I had presumed he would find my decisions particularly challenging to comprehend among all my children. Yet, people can defy expectations even after decades of acquaintance, Sarah noted. On the subject of unexpected events, I recalled a question I'd been meaning to ask. How did you manage to conceal our secret for so long? Given your position within the family and NextGen's growing influence, there must have been chances to reveal my investment to the children. Sarah flashed a sly grin, her eyes gleaming with a touch of mischief. It wasn't effortless, she admitted. There were some near misses. Like when James's firm managed our patent work years ago, and he nearly discovered your name on the shareholder documents. Or when I learned that Daniel had applied for an engineering position at NextGen immediately after college. That was news to me, as he never mentioned it before. Sarah conveyed he didn't progress beyond the initial interviews, not due to lack of qualifications, but because she covertly influenced the hiring committee towards other candidates. She feared if he joined NextGen, he might uncover your involvement. She pondered over the complexity of our sustained deception, all those years of secrecy. Sometimes she questioned its validity. Was it worth it? Sarah inquired. I pondered over her question thoughtfully. In certain aspects, no. My endeavor to instill values by concealing wealth might have had an adverse effect, making my children value financial status excessively, contrary to what I intended. And in other respects? In other respects, yes, I replied hesitantly. The disclosure fostered a kind of honesty between us that may not have occurred otherwise. It removed the veneer on both sides. This paved the way for something more genuine to blossom. Sarah nodded thoughtfully in agreement. Lessons with the greatest worth often stem from errors rather than victories. This sentiment I concur. Regrettably, the education derived was particularly bitter for all parties concerned following Sarah's departure. The remainder of the day was spent on my cookbook, paying special attention to a section detailing family recipes, culinary milestones marking celebrations, accomplishments, and solace during troubled periods. As I jotted down these recipes, I found myself incorporating narratives as well, the settings that gave each dish its significance. I wrote about the birthday cakes I'd baked for my children, even in our most austere years, the chicken soup that had comforted them through childhood ailments, the distinctive pasta meal we had grown to associate with the first day of school. These were not merely recipes. They represented tangible fragments of our shared narrative, manifestations of love that outlived both financial adversity and concealed prosperity. Reflecting on them, I felt a renewed bond with the mother I once was. Far from perfect, occasionally mistaken in my approaches, yet always driven by love and aspirations for my children's future. That very night, I got a text from Daniel, accompanied by an old picture of us at the beach. Don't you recall this day? The sent photo depicted the four of us, me and my 3 kids, during a rare coastal vacation when they were young. We were constructing a sandcastle together, all of us filled with joy, completely immersed in that moment. I could vividly remember that trip. For weeks, I had been saving my diner tips to make this modest getaway possible, although I could have easily paid for it using my NextGen dividends. What I recalled, I replied, is one of my most cherished memories. Your sister played a prank on you later that day, burying you in the sand, and you acted as if you were an emerging sea monster from the depths. His response was prompt. She had informed him that there were crabs in the sand that would nip at you if you moved too quickly. Despite being scared, I didn't acknowledge it. You, however, were always perceptive enough to sense our emotions, even when we tried to conceal them. A reminiscence of that moment brought a smile to my face. Mothers often have an intuitive understanding of such matters, I responded. Lately, I've been reflecting on those periods, Daniel messaged, and I've come to a significant realization. Although I now understand we weren't as financially strapped as it appeared, those seemingly simple moments were genuinely joyful. The worth wasn't derived from our possessions or lack thereof. It was in being united, secure in your affection. His observation resonated with me deeply. That is precisely what I had hoped you would grasp, I replied. True riches aren't quantifiable in dollars. I see that now, he responded. Later than sooner, I suppose, I conceded. Much later, I concurred. As I put down my phone, a sense of tranquility washed over me. My journey with my children would still present its hurdles. Old habits don't vanish immediately. New insights require time to fully absorb. However, we embarked on a path to something deeper than past experiences. For years, I feigned poverty, aspiring to instill values surpassing monetary worth in my offspring. When the facade was eventually discarded, they initially perceived me as rubbish, an annoyance, a burden, an unpleasant memory they wished to erase from their recollections. However, unveiling my actual financial condition left them stunned, not just by the revelation of my hidden fortune, but also by the confrontation with their biases, prejudices, and lack of empathy. From this shock emerged a reckoning. Though difficult, it was essential. It marked the initial attempts at rehabilitation and genuine bonding. As I retired for the night, I cast a glance at the family photo on my bedside table. All four of us at the beach, laughing together under the summer's glow. Regardless of past errors or misunderstandings that accrued over time, my love had been authentic. I believed that love was robust enough to withstand even the harshest realities. The future remained undetermined, yet for the first time in years, I approached it with sincere optimism for myself, my kids, and the honest connections we were now forming. If you found this tale of sweet vindication and forgiveness appealing, kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel, like and share this video, and enable notifications to stay updated on our fresh daily stories. We eagerly await your insights in the comments section below.